I am clearly playing games with fate by talking about this right now, but I'm going to go ahead. I'm making a game. Actually, my news is I've already made one, but I'm trying to make a better one. This is the path that everyone who talks about these things eventually does if they're even remotely serious. You talk about indie games long enough, you eventually become a developer, and that's kind of where I am at the moment. So, a little bit of background before this. I've talked about this in the past. I was a writer for a very, very, very long time, fiction writer, which did not work out because the fiction market sucks. I jumped in just as it was beginning to shut down. So I ended up wasting about 11 years trying to succeed in a field where I was basically doomed from the start. I haven't done fiction in about 2 or 3 years, give or take. The last piece I did was called The Remnant Pieces. I finished that up 2022, I think. I had this idea that after all of these years of trying to impress these asshole agents, I was going to do the piece I wanted to do, even though I knew that they weren't going to like it, and they didn't. Of course they didn't. It was epistolary fiction. They hate epistolary fiction. It's one of the epistolary novels date back to about 20 years. Like, the second novel after Don Quixote in the West was a fucking epistolary novel, and they still treat it like it's this weird avant-garde thing. I knew they weren't going to like it. It doesn't open on a track start. It's just a deeply personal thing I wanted to do because it was my work. Part of that was I planned in advance for this thing to be rejected a million times, so I decided I was going to try and sell it as a serial, which didn't work. Ended up going out on, it went out through like an email thing, and nobody cared about it, so never mind that. But here's what's important. I was working on ways to promote this thing, and one of the ways that I thought of was doing like an interactive website. And I'm referring to the kind of thing you saw back when I first got online, during that kind of post-bubble period in like the early 2000s. There was this time when people, believe it or not, did things on the internet without trying to make money on them. They were just trying to be creative. I know it's absurd to think of that today. But once upon a time, people saw this magnificent new technology not as a grift, not as a way to pick the pockets of their neighbors, but as a way to express themselves. And one of the ways they would do this is they would create these websites that were kind of virtual places. And you would wander through them, and there would be like little events. And I used to see these things that were set in like fantasy realms. You'd find libraries that explain the lore of what you're looking at. And it was a really neat concept. So I created kind of an interactive story, a very, very simple one, a very crude one, that was called A Strange Room Infiltrated by Strange Voices, which, if you're wondering what that means, would make sense if you had read The Remnant Pieces. It was, you're walking around the house where the story takes place, and you could look at different things, and there was like art, and there were like little videos and games and things, and there was kind of a puzzle built into it. It was really rudimentary stuff, because while I have studied a bit of programming in my time, I am not a programmer, or rather, I was not a programmer. Apparently that's changed a little bit over the past few months. I really enjoyed doing it. At that point, it had been about 11 years of doing conventional fiction. It felt really nice to be able to kind of step outside of that and do something different. And I really, really enjoyed it. It never went anywhere. It gotten some attention, but not a lot. And after that, I just kind of left it aside. I kind of forgot about it. I moved on to other things. I moved on to this. I moved on to my video game writing. But somewhere in the back of my head, I knew that eventually I was going to end up walking this path of development. Because again, if you spend enough time in this realm, eventually you lose enough of your marbles to think that that's a good idea. And I figured, I'd already done this a little bit with the website, that a good place to start was with interactive fiction. Now, this is actually something I've wanted to do for a long time. And the earlier website was kind of a part of that, but I wanted to do something that was a little bit more sophisticated. That was a little bit more like a game while still being like what I'm comfortable doing. And that's where Moonlight Narcosis came from. Now, Moonlight Narcosis is kind of a cursed name. I created it originally a long, long time ago when I still thought I could be traditionally published. I had a plan to do like all of these like short stories and novelettes to promote what I was doing, and Moonlight Narcosis was one of them. It followed a minor character from a trilogy I was working on at the time. And ever since then, it's become this kind of cursed name. If I give a project the name Moonlight Narcosis, it never finishes. Until now, I finished it. I put it on itch. It's just like an HTML thing. You can go check it out. It's really rough. But I needed to do that. And what Moonlight Narcosis is it is a combination of, or kind of like I guess you'd say a synthesis of various stories. So all of these various novels I've written over the years take place in a common universe, but really it's more like several interconnected universes. They have the same characters, they have some of the same places, but they're not always the same continuities. They kind of jump around. And after years and years of doing this, I wanted to kind of consolidate this and come up with an explanation as to why my universe or my universes are so messy. And that's what Moonlight Narcosis is. It's actually Universe 4. There have been 3 continuities so far. Remnant Pieces was the 3rd one. And I invite you to go check that out. I'm going to put links to all of this in the description. I invite you to go look at this. It is a mess. It's really messy. I hope that you can still appreciate that. I've realized over the years that some people, even people who profess to be interested in independent media, can get really picky about small things. I hope you will not be like that. I hope that you can appreciate this thing for what it is. Anyway, having finished that, I moved on. I wanted to keep going with this. I had another idea at the end of this, which is usually how it goes with me. I finish one project, I'm relieved to be done with it because it gets frustrating near the end, and I immediately come up with another idea that stems off of it. And that's what happened here. And in this case, it was the Baleful Chorus. Now, the Baleful Chorus is not done. It's actually a multi-story set. It's a multi-game set, if you will. I've done 2 of them. The 3rd one is in progress. It may not be the last one. It may go to 4. I haven't decided yet. It's going to depend on whether or not I can wrap up this really complex spec story by the end of the 3rd part. You know, I used to tell really simple stories, and it seems like spec editors, science fiction editors, didn't want that. They wanted shit that doesn't make sense. So I finally gave them what they want, but it's interactive fiction, so they're not going to take it. But the hell with them. I've stopped trying to impress these assholes a long time ago. Anyway, you can't see any of those yet. I finished 2 parts of this. I haven't posted them yet because there's work I still need to do on those. There's still things I'm going to end up having to change. But while I was working on this, I got to thinking. I got to thinking about the research I'd done on State of Indie and things like that. And as you may recall from some of the videos I've made, there is kind of a sleeper genre that nobody ever talks about, people who do the videos never talk about, and those are visual novels. Now, visual novels are kind of an interesting genre for me because depending on how they're designed, they can be games, but they're not necessarily games. There's what referred to, I think, are called dynamic VNs, which have no branches, which are not meaningfully games at all, even if they are sold on places like Steam. But what you may recall if you've watched enough of my videos is that VNs actually, even though they're rarely huge hits, they tend to have a very high median income, despite often being very cheap, because there is an audience for this. It's a very niche audience, but it's an audience that's willing to try new things. It's an audience that's willing to overlook little rough spots. And so I've kind of thought over the years, if I was going to jump into this, just as a person on my own, that's what I would do. Of course, for a long time, that was absurd. Like, the notion of me doing a game like this was absolutely ridiculous. But one of the things I've realized as the last State of Indie is I've spoken to a lot of independent developers, hundreds over the years, and I've realized the only way to really understand what these people go through is to actually do it. I know what it's like to be an independent author. I know how much it sucks. I know how terrible it is. I know how many grifters and con men are active in this space. I know how many SEO cheerleaders write articles about topics they don't understand. I understand what it's like when people inside the industry lie to me repeatedly. But I don't know. I mean, presumably it's the same thing for video games, but I don't know because I've never made one. And ultimately, that's what got me onto the track I was looking at, was years and years and years and years of seeing all these stupid little think pieces and all these thought leaders telling me about how self-publishing has disrupted the industry and all you have to do is hang out your shingle and next thing you know you sold 1 million copies. And knowing for a fact that that's not true. Knowing for a fact that it's more complex than that and screaming into the void and having no one hear me. And as I begin to speak to video game developers, I realized it's the same thing here. Everybody's talking about, indie's taken over and nobody plays AAA games anymore. And I know that's not true. And I know the things these people are saying are horse shit. And I wanted to figure out what it's actually like. I wanted to figure out how rich the horse shit was. But ultimately, you can only learn so much talking to people. Ultimately, if you want to understand this, you have to go into the reads. You have to go deep in and you have to actually do the thing you're researching. And that's where I'm down to. So, let's talk about my project. The name of the game, the working title is Knowledge is Treachery. It is related to the Baleful Chorus, which again is this big interactive fiction series that I have not released yet. It is like a prequel / side story involving a couple of significant characters. As of right now, I have downloaded the software to make it, of course, and I have a general idea of what it's going to look like. I know how it's going to slot into the plot. I know what mechanics are going to be in here. This is not a dynamic VN. This will be something that, at least in theory, should be a video game. And my hope is that I can release this thing before the end of this year. Tall order, I know. Because even with this being a very simple project I'm working at, something very, very basic, something that ultimately is mostly writing, something I've been doing most of my life, something I've done many times, including on deadlines, it still involves a lot of work in areas that I don't really understand. But that's the point. My hope is that when you see State of Indie 2025, I will be able to bring insight from the other side. I won't just be writing about this as a person who's spoken to developers. I will be one. In terms of how the game does, probably not that great. I am fully expecting this thing to flop. I am budgeting it accordingly. I'm not spending a lot of money on this thing. But on the other hand, again, the nice thing about VNs is you don't really have to. You can price these things pretty low. People will give them a shot. So who knows? It might do okay. I don't think this is going to be revolutionary. It's not going to make me famous. It's not going to make me a star. It's not going to launch a second career. But if it pays for itself, or even if it comes close to paying for itself, I will consider this to be a success. So that's the story right now. And as I am saying this, I have not started working on Knowledge is Treachery because, frankly, I've been hip deep in the third part of the Baleful Chorus. I've been working on that instead. I hope at some point you'll see that. Eventually, I will release those. Even if I completely fuck up here and Knowledge is Treachery never comes out, you will at least see the interactive fiction I've been working on, which is game-like. The more recent ones I've done. The first part really wasn't a game, and the later ones, especially this one I'm working on right now, really is. So, I hope that you will stick with me through this project. I will intermittently talk about the progress, or maybe this is the only time I'll ever talk about it. I don't know. I am kind of putting this out there to keep myself honest so that I keep working on it. But at the moment, I really, really, really could not tell you how much effort I'm going to put into this. I can't tell you for sure that it's going to be finished. But I do have high hopes, and even if this completely fails, I hope that this does mean at the end of this year, Come November, when the next SOI comes out, you will see a content creator with a little bit more insight into the process. So stay tuned. I hope you will stick with me, and we'll see how this goes.